The collision of two worlds. The planet Ulthor was a war-torn landscape, once beautiful and vibrant, now reduced to a silent wasteland of broken cities and smoldering ruins. The once proud capital city, Zephalon, had been all but destroyed in a final desperate assault by the human forces. The Stellarians, an ancient and proud alien race, had defended it fiercely, but against the unexpected ingenuity and persistence of humanity, they had no choice but to retreat. Amara, a young Stellarian, stood among the wreckage of her once thriving home. Her heart ached at the sight of the devastation. Her people, her family, her entire way of life was crumbling around her. Yet, amid the rubble, something flickered within her. Anger. Anger at the humans who had arrived out of nowhere, with their primitive technology and relentless drive, altering the course of a war that had been hers to win. She clenched her fists, her violet skin shimmering faintly in the pale light of the setting sun. The human soldiers had done their damage. But it was the commander, Ethan Cole, that she hated most. His leadership had turned the tide of the war, rallying his people when defeat seemed imminent. His strategies were sharp, his mind brilliant, and his unshakable will made him both feared and admired. But there was something else, something Amara couldn't deny. It was the way he had carried himself in battle, how he had saved lives when he could have chosen to strike down his enemies without mercy. She despised him for that too, because the more she learned about him, the more she realized that perhaps the war wasn't as black and white as she had once believed. It was on a night like any other that they crossed paths again. Amara had been assigned a reconnaissance mission to retrieve valuable intelligence from a human outpost near the remnants of the city. She had approached quietly, her footsteps barely making a sound against the cracked earth, when she saw him. Commander Ethan Cole. He was standing alone, a silhouette against the faint glow of the dying city behind him. The wind swept through his dark hair, his sharp features illuminated by the glow of distant fires. She could see the weariness in his posture, the exhaustion of a soldier who had fought too many battles. He was human, a warrior, and yet there was something different about him. He wasn't like the others, who fought with brutal efficiency. There was compassion in him, a quiet sense of honor, as though he fought not for power, but for something far greater. Amara watched him from a distance, hidden in the shadows, as he stood motionless, lost in thought. She knew she had the advantage. If she acted quickly, she could take him out before he even knew she was there. Yet, for reasons she couldn't understand, she hesitated. There was a flicker of curiosity in her that refused to burn away. The moment passed, and before she could make a decision, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You know, you'll never hit me if you keep standing there like a statue." Amara froze, her heart leaping in her chest. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't sensed him at all. How had he known? And then she saw him. Ethan Cole, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers with the calm confidence of a man who had seen the worst the universe could throw at him and come out unscathed. "I don't miss," she said, her voice cold, her hand tightening around the energy blade she carried. "I'm sure you don't," Ethan replied, his voice steady, not betraying an ounce of fear. "But that's not why I'm here." Amara narrowed her eyes, not lowering her weapon. "Then why are you here?" Ethan looked at her, his gaze lingering on her, taking in the defiance in her stance and the hardness in her eyes. "I came to see if the rumors about the Stellarian princess were true," he said, his lips curling into a small smile. "And it seems they are." Amara's heart skipped a beat. A princess. She had never been called that before. It was a title she had never accepted, a burden she'd never wanted. But it seemed that even the humans had heard of her family, her lineage, her people. And yet, here she was, standing on the ruins of her civilization, facing the one person she had sworn to destroy. "I'm no princess," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm just a soldier, just like you." "Maybe," Ethan said softly, "but I don't think you're here to kill me, are you?" Amara's grip on her weapon loosened ever so slightly. "What makes you say that?" she asked, confused by his calm demeanor. Because, deep down, you don't want to be my enemy. You're here because, like me, you're tired. Tired of the war. Tired of losing. Tired of everything being reduced to this pointless violence. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent so long hating him, blaming him for the destruction of everything she held dear. Yet here he was, standing before her as though they shared the same pain, the same exhaustion. He wasn't like the others. The War of the Hearts. Days passed, and Amara found herself unable to forget the human commander. Ethan Cole's words echoed in her mind, tugging at a part of her she had long buried beneath the anger and hatred she had held toward the humans. She had heard tales of their bravery, their ability to overcome insurmountable odds with a tenacity unmatched by any other species. Yet those tales had never seemed real until she saw it firsthand. The kindness, the humanity in Ethan's eyes. It all spoke to something deeper than war, something she had never expected from someone who had helped bring her people to the brink of annihilation. Her duties as a Stellarian officer demanded focus, yet each mission became more difficult. When they came face to face on the battlefield, their eyes would meet for just a moment, long enough for the emotions to flicker between them before they turned back to their respective duties. Amara, despite herself, had found it hard to remain indifferent to him. And every time they encountered each other in the heat of battle, it seemed like they were always drawn to one another, not as enemies, but as something more, something human and raw. One evening, the Stellarians launched a counteroffensive. The human fleet had attacked a critical supply base on one of their border worlds, and Amara was ordered to intercept their forces before they could escape. She led her squadron into the thick of battle, the sharp, stinging smell of plasma, and the deafening sound of ships being torn apart filling the air. The once beautiful skies above the planet were now dark with smoke and debris. Amara's heart raced as she piloted her fighter into enemy territory. Her mission was simple: stop the humans at all costs. But her focus wavered. She found herself scanning the battlefield for one particular ship, a familiar, sleek human warship that she had encountered several times before. The Vanguard. And there, in the midst of the chaos, was Ethan, commanding his vessel with the precision and calm of someone who had seen the worst the galaxy could offer. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with him across the battlefield. For a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. In the heat of battle, amid the chaos of explosions and the screams of dying ships, they shared a moment of understanding. It wasn't an agreement. It wasn't peace, but it was something undeniable. Her heart clenched. She couldn't do this, not with him. For the first time since the war began, Amara found herself hesitating in the middle of a fight. Her targeting system blinked red, locking onto the Vanguard, and for the briefest moment, she thought of taking the shot. The orders were clear: destroy the ship. She was a soldier, after all. But then, something within her broke. Before she could act, a sudden explosion sent her fighter into a tailspin. Her systems malfunctioned, alarms blaring, and the ship veered dangerously close to an asteroid field. Amara fought the controls, her mind racing. Her fighter was damaged, but she refused to give in. There was a storm of battle rage inside her, but now it was tangled with the strange, overwhelming feeling that had taken root ever since she first encountered Ethan. The next thing she knew, she felt a jolt as her fighter was pulled from the asteroid field. Her comm system crackled to life. Amara, you need to pull back. You're too far from the formation. Ethan's voice came through the static, calm as ever. You're in danger. Her heart skipped a beat. He had come for her. Commander Cole, she asked, disbelief and confusion lacing her words. You're not going to get out of this alone, are you? His voice held a quiet challenge, but there was no mocking, no arrogance. Let me help you. Amara clenched her jaw, her pride warring with the undeniable pull she felt toward him. She had been trained to fight, to never show weakness, yet here she was outmatched by the one human she had grown to both despise and understand. Was she truly going to let him help her? Let him save her? I don't need your help, she shot back, her voice sharp. But it came out hollow, as though she was only trying to convince herself. "I'm not giving you a choice," Ethan said with a smile in his voice, and before she could argue, his ship moved into position and locked onto hers, stabilizing the trajectory with precise, calculated movements. He guided her away from the asteroid field, bringing her back to the relative safety of the battlefront. "Thanks," she muttered, even as every instinct screamed at her to pull away, to avoid this. But when he was so close, when his voice was so steady, when his actions showed nothing but the intent to save her, it was hard to resist. "You can thank me later," he said. "But first, you need to get back to your fleet. You can't fight this war on your own." "I'm not alone," she said, biting back the sudden wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "My people are with me." "They may be with you, but you're alone in this fight. You don't need to keep carrying this burden by yourself," Ethan replied, his voice gentler than before. For a moment, silence stretched between them, neither saying anything more. It was strange, this shared space between enemies, where the usual barriers had crumbled away to reveal something more human than either of them had expected. "I'm not your enemy, Amara," Ethan finally said, breaking the silence. "And I don't think you are mine either." Amara felt a pang in her chest at the honesty in his words. She wanted to argue, to retort with something cold, something harsh, but she couldn't. His words felt like a truth she didn't want to acknowledge. "I don't know what I am anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're someone who deserves more than this war," Ethan said softly. "You're not a tool of destruction. You're so much more than that." Amara's heart thundered in her chest. His words were disarming, piercing through the walls she had built up so carefully. And though she didn't know what to make of it, something inside her shifted. She wasn't sure if she was ready to accept it. But for the first time, Amara felt a flicker of hope. Hope for something different. Hope for peace. And maybe, just maybe, hope for something more with the human who had somehow managed to break through her hardened exterior. But as the battle raged on around them, Amara knew that hope, like everything else, had its price. And no matter how she felt, the war was far from over. The price of freedom. The war between the humans and the Stellarians had reached a fever pitch, and Amara felt the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. Each day brought new losses, new casualties, and a line between enemy and ally grew thinner with every encounter. She had been trained to be fierce, to never show weakness in the face of battle, but each time she saw Ethan, each time their eyes met across the chaos, she felt something in her crumble. She couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something between them, something neither war nor loyalty could erase. The war had torn through the galaxy with ruthless speed, and neither side was willing to relent. Each planet, each system they fought over, was a precious resource to both sides. Amara's people believed they were protecting their heritage, their legacy among the stars. The humans, on the other hand, fought for their place in the universe, driven by a stubborn sense of purpose and survival. But neither side had accounted for the impact of what was growing between Amara and Ethan. Something more than mere sympathy, something deeper. They hadn't just been enemies, they had become something more, fellow soldiers in a war neither of them wanted. Neither of them expected. One evening, after a particularly grueling battle, Amara found herself standing at the edge of a quiet battlefield. What had once been a peaceful planet now turned into a graveyard of broken ships and fallen warriors. The silence was unsettling, and Amara felt the sting of both victory and loss. She had been a part of this, of both sides, and there was no escaping that truth now. No matter how much she had come to care for the human commander, the war still loomed large. A familiar voice broke her reverie. "You're standing out here like a ghost," Ethan said, stepping up beside her. He looked as tired as she felt, his uniform dusted with the remnants of battle. But unlike the others, there was no mask of bravado on his face. His eyes were wide, filled with the same uncertainty she saw in her own reflection every day. "I'm not sure I know who I am anymore," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm no longer sure what I'm fighting for. You don't have to fight alone, Amara, Ethan said, his voice low but firm. You've been carrying this war on your back for so long, but it's not just your fight anymore. It's all of ours. We don't have to keep fighting like this. She turned to look at him, her heart pounding in her chest. What are you suggesting? She asked, unable to hide the flicker of hope that rose within her. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. I'm suggesting that we stop fighting, that we find a way to end this for both of us. Amara's heart twisted painfully in her chest. The idea of surrender was foreign to her, a concept she had been taught to despise. To give up would mean conceding defeat. To trust the enemy would be to betray her people. But then she looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the raw sincerity in his eyes. She saw the same exhaustion that mirrored her own. Ethan was right. They had been fighting for so long, both of them, and it had cost them so much. She had lost her family. He had lost his home. What else could they possibly sacrifice? Are you saying we should abandon our people? She asked, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. No, Ethan said quickly. I'm saying we fight for something different, something better. I'm saying we don't have to keep tearing each other apart. I'm saying we can change the course of this war together by revealing the truth about who is really causing this conflict. Amara's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Ethan took a step closer, his voice lowered as he explained. The war didn't start because of us. It started because of power-hungry leaders who wanted to control the galaxy. And they're playing both sides against each other, using the chaos as a cover for their real plans. If we expose them, we can end this madness. A moment of silence passed between them, the weight of his words sinking in. Was it really possible? Could they truly end the war, not with bloodshed, but with the truth? I can't just betray my people, Amara said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. But, she paused, her mind racing. If what you're saying is true, then maybe this war was never ours to fight. Maybe it's time to expose the ones who have been pulling the strings. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. We don't have to be enemies, Amara. Not anymore. We can stand together against those who would use us. And together, we can change everything. For a long moment, Amara stood there, her heart torn between the loyalty she felt toward her people and the burning hope that flickered within her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future without war, a future where she wasn't defined by the battle, but by the choice to create something better. The galaxy was a broken place, torn apart by lies and greed. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something else. A chance for peace, for love. As they stood together, hand in hand, the distant stars above seemed to glow a little brighter, and Amara realized that she had taken the first step toward something she hadn't dared to dream of, a future where she and Ethan could finally stand side by side, not as enemies, but as allies. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be sacrifices, and there would be risks. But it was a chance, one she couldn't afford to turn down. We have to move quickly, she said, her voice filled with newfound resolve. Before it's too late. Ethan smiled at her, his eyes filled with both hope and determination. Together, he said simply, we'll do this together. And with that, they began the journey that would change the fate of the galaxy. And their hearts, forever. The ultimate sacrifice. The plan was risky, far riskier than either Amara or Ethan could have ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. The war had consumed them both for so long, and now they were ready to take the one step that could change everything. To expose the true architects behind the bloodshed, the leaders who had manipulated both the Stellarians and humans into this endless conflict. Their enemies weren't just across the battlefield. They were hidden in the shadows, pulling the strings. Amara and Ethan knew that to bring an end to this war, they had to strike at the heart of it. The corrupt powers that controlled both their worlds. The human fleet and the Stellarian forces were both heading to a secret summit, a peace negotiation. Though Amara knew better than to trust its true intentions, it wasn't peace they sought. It was power. The leaders of both sides planned to use the summit to declare victory and solidify their control over the galaxy. But Ethan and Amara had different plans. They had uncovered the truth. The summit was a trap. It was orchestrated by the highest-ranking officials on both sides, who intended to use the opportunity to eliminate anyone who might threaten their control. The peace talks were nothing more than a cover for an execution. In the dead of night, Amara and Ethan slipped into the heart of the enemy's territory, a covert mission that required both subtlety and precision. Their goal was simple: find the evidence that would expose the corruption of the leadership before the summit began. They would broadcast the truth to the entire galaxy, destroying the warlord's hold on power, and in doing so, end the war once and for all. "Are you sure about this?" Amara asked, her voice a whisper as they moved through the dimly lit corridors of the human outpost, their footsteps barely making the sound. Her heart was racing, her mind filled with a mix of determination and doubt. There was no turning back. The path they were walking led to an unknown future, and neither of them knew if they would make it out alive. Ethan stopped for a moment, turning to her. His face was lit by the faint glow of a control panel as he adjusted his communicator. "No, I'm not sure," he admitted, his eyes intense with a mix of resolve and concern. "But I know this. If we don't do this, nothing will ever change. If we don't take this chance, then we're just going to keep fighting, keep losing. And I can't live with that anymore." Amara nodded silently, her gaze softening as she looked at him. She had never wanted this war. She had never wanted to be a soldier. But somehow, over the course of their shared moments, when their eyes met across the battlefield and in quiet conversations like this one, she had begun to believe in something bigger than herself. They had become partners, not just in the war, but in their dream for peace, and that dream was worth fighting for. Together, they crept closer to the heavily guarded Central Command Center, where the galaxy's most powerful leaders had gathered. As they moved, Ethan caught Amara's hand, his touch grounding her in the chaos. Their silent communication spoke volumes. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. They'd reached the secure vault that contained the encrypted files they needed. A single slip of the handprint scanner, and the vault door slid open, revealing the damning evidence: the hidden communications between the warlords, the plans to manipulate the war, and the lives they had sacrificed to further their own ambitions. Amara's breath caught in her throat as she scanned the data. Every word felt like a punch to the gut, a confirmation of everything they had suspected. These weren't leaders, they were tyrants. They had been using the war to manipulate the galaxy, all for the sake of power. "We have to send this to every corner of the galaxy," Ethan said, his voice hard with determination. "We have to make sure no one can ignore this." But just as Amara was about to activate the broadcast, an alarm blared, piercing the silence. "We've been compromised," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "They know we're here." Ethan's face hardened. "We don't have time for subtlety. We need to move now." In that moment, everything changed. Their quiet mission of truth had turned into a desperate fight for survival. Amara and Ethan dashed through the corridors, evading guards, their hearts pounding in sync as they tried to reach the escape pods. But the facility was swarming with soldiers now, and they were cornered. Their options were narrowing with every passing second. A trap had been set for them. This was always the plan. They had come too far, and now they had to pay the price for it. Ethan turned to her, his expression fierce. "Amara, I can hold them off. You need to get the information out." "No," Amara said, her voice sharp, panic creeping into her chest. "We do this together, or we don't do it at all." The explosion rocked the hallway, sending both of them to the ground. The sound of boots marching closer filled the silence that followed. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, pulling her to her feet. "We need to finish this. We need to let everyone know the truth." Amara grabbed his hand, and together They fought their way to the terminal, managing to send the encrypted files into the galaxy's communication network. The truth would be broadcasted to every star system. It was a victory for them, a victory for the people who had been enslaved by the lies of their leaders. As the last of the soldiers closed in, Ethan grabbed Amara and pushed her toward an escape pod. "Go," he yelled, urgency in his voice. "This is it. You have to survive. You have to make sure the message gets out." Amara hesitated for only a moment. She knew the truth. She knew that everything they had done had led to this point. But she also knew that, without Ethan by her side, there would be no future. "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely, gripping his hand. With a final, desperate kiss, Amara and Ethan shared a fleeting moment of peace before they activated the escape pod, their hearts racing as they fled the facility, leaving the warlords to face the consequences of their actions. The stars above them shone brighter than ever before, the weight of their actions hanging heavy in the air. The war had just begun to change. A new beginning. The escape pod shuddered as it blasted through the atmosphere, leaving the crumbling facility far behind. Amara sat beside Ethan, her hand still firmly clasped in his, but her mind was spinning. The explosion had thrown them off course, and they had barely escaped the grasp of the enemy forces. The truth they had broadcasted, their desperate move to expose the corrupt leaders behind the war, was now out there, for all the galaxy to see. But they were still not safe. The pod's emergency systems were intact, but they had no idea if the rest of the galaxy had received their message or if the warlords would retaliate. Their mission had been a success, but the fallout was just beginning. They had sacrificed everything for this moment, for the hope of peace. And now, all they could do was wait. Ethan's eyes met Amara's, and for a moment, the world outside the pod faded away. They were no longer soldiers. They were survivors. They had done the impossible together, and somehow that felt like enough. "You know," Ethan said with a half-smile, breaking the silence, "I thought we'd have a lot more time to enjoy victory before the next battle started." Amara's lips twitched into a smile, but the tension in her shoulders remained. "Victory doesn't come easy. I think we both know that." "True," he agreed, his hand squeezing hers. "But at least we have a chance now. A real chance for peace." Amara looked out the pod's window, watching the stars rush by in a blur of lights. The galaxy, once divided by hate and fear, was on the cusp of something new. They had brought down the warlords who had been playing both sides against each other. The leaders who had kept the galaxy in the grip of war for so long would no longer be in control. The people would rise, and the galaxy would have a chance to rebuild. But even as she looked ahead, Amara knew the road would be difficult. The path to peace was never easy, especially not after so much destruction. Many would resist change. Many would try to hold on to the power they had stolen. The struggle was far from over. Yet, for the first time in years, Amara felt something she hadn't thought possible. Hope. It wasn't just about winning battles. It wasn't just about defeating their enemies. It was about something more, something they had both realized during their time together. It was about changing the galaxy, one small step at a time. And with Ethan by her side, she felt ready for whatever came next. "I don't know where we go from here," Amara said, her voice soft. "Wherever we go," Ethan replied, "we'll go together." As they glided through space, the pod heading toward an unknown destination, Amara felt a peace settle over her that had eluded her for so long. The war had taken so much from her, from both of them, but it hadn't taken everything. They still had each other, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. They would face whatever came next, together.